Okay, I think hopefully our stream worked. I don't know if anybody has a chance to maybe look at the first stream and see whether the audio actually worked and the video looked okay. Drew, you're nodding, it's okay? Okay. Maybe press play and see if the audio is there. It won't be that much good. So hopefully that's working for us. Yes? Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, so we're back with our layout file. So now we actually want to run this. So we'll use the emulator. So a couple of the tools that are here, we're going to use some of these things later. So for example, we have a simple connect to Firebase, which we'll do later on. These two tools we'll use a fair bit. There's the Avd Manager. Avd is the Android virtual device. So that allows us to create basically some version of an Android phone or tablet where we pick the device and we can see how it will run. We also have the SDK manager, which we may need later on. So this shows us, for example, what's installed. So I've got Android 9 mostly installed, and then some of 8 and 7 partly installed. We don't want to install all of these because these are massive images. They're gigs and gigs worth of hard drive space. But occasionally we may need to test on a particular version. So we've got here a little play button. So here, this is our compile button. We've already compiled. If we play, Android Studio will build and then launch. So when I click run, I may have to go through this process. So does anything show up in your available virtual devices, or is it empty? This little window should pop up when you click the run button. It says select deployment target. So there might be a default virtual device there, or there may not be. What are you seeing in yours? Nothing? Okay, so let's click on create a new virtual device. So down here at the bottom, do you have this button to create a new virtual device? So click on that. And then you can actually pick, let's pick a phone. And so for example, I think I've got the Nexus 5X. Doesn't really matter which device you pick. So I'll just maybe choose the, let's say I'll choose the Pixel 3. It actually shows us the dimensions and the density. So pick any device you like and click next. And then it tells us, which versions of the API are recommended for that device. So I'll just accept. So this is recommending API level 28, which is Android 9. I'll just accept that recommendation and click next. And then we can just give it a name. I'll just leave it. And we can set the startup orientation. So when we start this emulator, do we want it in portrait or landscape mode? Most of the time, if we're developing for phone, we're going to probably choose portrait. So I'll leave that as the default. The emulators can be rotated, and we are going to want to do that so we can see every time we make a UI change, how does it look in landscape mode? How does it look in portrait mode? The enabled device frame, that'll just put an image of the phone around our screen. So I'll just leave that checked. I'm not going to change anything here. I'm just going to click finish. So all I basically did was create a new virtual device and accept all of the default options. So now that my Pixel 3 that I've just added is in my list of available virtual devices. Anybody have any problem adding a virtual device, or did this work okay? It may need to download, okay. And downloading is slow because those virtual devices are, we don't want to add too many because each one I think is over a gigabyte. So I probably won't keep all of these. Basically, I'm sticking with kind of a phone and one tablet. And then you can say use this same selection so the next time you run the app, if you check that box on the bottom, it won't keep asking you which device do you want. You can just have it default to the current device if you check that box. Notice also here it says I get a little warning in yellow, no USB devices are detected. So that would be if I actually plug my phone in via USB. It would show here. So if you have a charging cable and you have an Android device, you can try plugging your device in and actually running the app on your device if you like. So I'll just click OK here. Maybe just give me some indication when your things have finished downloading so I don't get too far ahead, but I'll just show you what it looks like. And it's already giving me an error with that particular emulator, so I'm not sure if my Pixel emulator is going to run. But I'll let my build run and we'll see. If not, I may have to run it with my older emulator, my Nexus 5. I know that one should work. Now, launching the emulator, as you can see, is very slow. This is why one of the links I put in tools and resources is that third-party emulator called Genymotion. You can try that one if you like. Fortunately, this does also have, once our app is running, there is the ability to reload the app, but only to reload the changes. So we don't have to stop the emulator every time and restart it every time because it is slow. So we will use that kind of hot reload often because it will save us time being able to view our changes. So all I can really do is wait for my Gradle build to kind of finish here. So we can see here, this is kind of in preview mode for my Pixel. If I want, I could preview it for other devices by clicking this drop down. It's also zoomed way out, so we can zoom in here. All right, well, I guess there's some other things we can look at while this is running. So over here, we've got a list of when we're in the design view, when we go to text view, this little window, those windows go away. But in design view here, we can see the kinds of controls we can put on. So we've got a common tab with text views. So again, those are like label, basically the equivalent of a label. Buttons, images would go in an image view. For text, we've got things like a plain text, a password, email. So we can kind of drag these on. We have this one text view here. If I select it, we notice a few things. Notice these arrows and where it's positioned. Now this is probably similar. Everybody, is there anybody here who wasn't in the Swift course? Hasn't taken Swift? Everyone took Swift. So Swift has iOS development has this notion of constraints, right? So Android has adopted this as well. So that's the default. We don't have to use a constraint layout, but by default in Android, when we create an activity, we have a constraint layout. So the idea is that here things are not positioned absolutely, they're constrained relative to other things as well as to the parent window. So that's why all of our elements go inside this constraint layout tag. So these all indicate that this text view is anchored both horizontally and vertically centered in the activity, regardless of the device size and regardless of the orientation. So we can set here things like margins and padding through the properties. It's got text on it, which again, we'd probably want to move to a resource file separately. Okay, I'm thinking my Pixel emulator is not going to run, so I'm going to retry this, but this time I'm going to choose my Nexus 5 because I know this one works. Should work for my project. Unfortunately, I got to build it again. But my Nexus 5 emulator loads. So our emulator will be slow to start. It should be faster in subsequent running of the app. So we've got this little toolbar off to the side where we can turn the device off, we can change the volume, we can rotate it. So we can check our app and we can rotate it back. We can access the camera, we can zoom, and we have the back home as well as some settings. So for example, if we want to turn the GPS on, we can make sure that it would be turned on. For example, how does our app behave when cellular's turned off? So we can test all these things through the emulator. So again, it won't be this slow every time waiting for our device to come online. Have your virtual devices downloaded yet or still downloading? Downloaded, okay. So once it's downloaded, you can press run and try to load your app on the device. We can also set it to remember things. So for example, one of the things we're going to want to add in later is our ability to log into our app with Google when we add authentication. So it can do things like remember your Google login, so you're not going to have to put it in every time. So what we should get is a simple app with Hello World in the middle, and we should be able to rotate that app, and Hello World should stay right side up, anchored both vertically and horizontally. So here's our app. Right, there's our text view in the middle. It's got our app title at the top by default in this bar, title bar, if we rotate the device. Now, there's one thing that's odd about the emulator that you'll notice. It rotates the physical device, but it doesn't actually rotate the content. There's actually a little button here. There was a little button here that allows me to rotate the contents of the screen. It just disappeared, eh? Yes, that's true. I'm going to put it back. Yes, thank you. If I go into my settings, which I can either get at here, or if I click and drag, I can go into my settings and turn on auto rotate. So by default in the emulator, auto rotate is off. Or I could just click settings here. If I enable auto rotate, now I can rotate the device. Takes a second, so now we can see our text rotates and it's still centered in the screen. So that's what the constraint layout is doing for us. There are older layouts available. There's a grid layout, there's a relative layout. Android's really moved away from all those. Pretty much most layouts now are using constraint layout. It is the most scalable. So I can rotate my device back. So one of the files we looked at was this Android manifest.xml. So this is where we've got this property here on line 8 that it has the name of our application. That's what's showing up in the title bar. So if we want to change this text, we can change it in the Android manifest, and that way the app name will be something new. And this is also, you'll notice, it's using a string resource. So rather than being here, it actually reads it from our values strings. It's reading a variable called app name. And all of the resource names are always all lowercase with underscores. That's the convention. So if I go to strings, here's our app name string resource. So let's change this to something else that's kind of a cryptic name. It's fine for our package name in the store. It's not a great title to have on the top of our app. So I'll put in something a little more user-friendly. You can put in anything you like. I'll call it our first Android app. So again, this is under resources, values, and strings.xml. I can also jump here if I just highlight app name. No, there's a shortcut key which escapes me at the moment. Sorry. So if I want to rerun the app, but I don't want to start the emulator all over again, now this little yellow lightning bolt is enabled. It wasn't enabled before, but it's enabled now, and it says apply changes. So this will rerun the app without having to restart the entire emulator. So it's right beside the run button is apply changes. So I'm going to apply the changes. And now my emulator will stay running, but it will restart just this one app. So it should load exactly the same, but our title in the green navigation bar, that should change from the original app name title to the text we put in our string resource file. So notice my emulator is still running. And now our app reloads with the new title. Has anybody been able to run their app in the emulator and actually see it? Or not yet? Yes? Is anybody having a problem getting their app to run? Okay. So let's look a little bit more at layout. So I'm going to click on our hello world, which we will get rid of in a bit. If you expand so if we click on the text view, we get the attributes over here on the right. So a couple that are important. So the width and height default to wrap the content. So that object is scalable. We add more text, it's going to get bigger. We add less text, it's going to get smaller, right? It's not set dimensions. So we've got a few options here. We can set it to just be as big as the content allows. we can also match it to a particular constraint or match it to the size of the parent. If we want it to, say, be 100% width. Now, sizing in Android is a bit interesting. So let's look at the size. There's two different kinds of size dimensions when it comes to Android. So notice here our text size. Our text size is set to 14 SP. So SP stands for scale independent pixels. We only use SP for text, okay, because there are two different things that will affect how big the text is. The first thing is simply the resolution. Okay? So it's basically 1 SP is 1 pixel on a 160 dpi screen. So it's partly related simply to pixel density, but there's another variable when it comes to text that doesn't affect the size of other elements like images or buttons. And you have to remember that users can control the text size on their device. So Ali and I may have the same device, but maybe I have the text size set higher. Okay? So the scale independent pixels is a combination of both the DPI as well as the user's individual text size settings. That only applies for text. So we won't see SP as a unit for sizing for images, buttons, or anything else, only text, because it is something the user can change. For all other elements, like just the general height and width, we use, so this unit is SP, the other unit we use is DP, which is density independent pixels. So the basic rule here is 1 dp is equal to 1 pixel on a screen that's 160 dpi. So the scale independent, the SP is a combination of this plus factoring for the user's text size settings. So most of the time we're going to use DP for dimensions with the exception of text. Text we used SP. This will allow our devices to scale. Different resolutions, different device, our apps to scale to different devices. Now, our hello world, it does actually have the text hard-coded right in, which we don't really want to do. That's not ideal. We actually should have a hello world string resource, and we should be reading that string resource. So as Priyank said, if we have hello world 10 places in the app, we can go to that one and we can go to the string resource and change it there. So there's two ways we can do this. We can either change it through the attribute here, or we can do it through the XML view. We'll do it here. So I'll click on text. Make this a little bigger. If I click this little kind of rectangle at the end, I then get this resources pop-up window. So we want to create a new string resource. So I'm going to click this drop down at the top right that says add a new resource. And I'll choose new string value. So I'll give it a name. This name must be all lowercase with underscore separating words. So I'll call this hello underscore world. So that's the name. And then the resource value is the actual text we want to display in the activity. So it'll say hello world with an exclamation mark. And it's asking which, by default, it goes into strings.xml. So I'll say OK. So now our hard-coded text has been replaced with the string resource. If we open up strings.xml, go back here, it's now added this key. We could do this manually if we wanted to. We don't need to use that little pop-up. We could come in here, we could manually add line 3, string name equals, and then we could go back to our layout and reference that variable. That's just kind of a shortcut by clicking that little button and using that pop-up window. It writes the code for us. So if we run the app, if I apply the changes, we shouldn't see any difference. Our text view is still going to say hello world. But if we want to change it afterwards, we can now change it in our resource file rather than changing it directly in our main activity. So we won't actually see anything change. In a minute, we'll try changing the message through our resource file. And then we will want to verify that that change is actually reflected in the new UI. So if I want to change it here from hello world exclamation mark, I'll just change the message slightly. You can make any change you like, so long as it doesn't just say hello world with an exclamation mark. So I'll change the message. Notice actually I've got an error here now. What's the issue with my new message? I do need to escape my character. And now I'll apply my changes. We'll give it a minute, and my new message should show up on the text view. So app restarts, and now it's reading the new message from strings.xml. So we only have one version of activity main. If I run this for at a tablet factor, it's going to be the same. I'll actually do that just to see the difference. I'll run the app, but this time I actually have a Nexus 9. So this is an Android tablet rather than a phone. So I can run it that way as well. So we only have a single layout file here. We've got activity main. We have the option, sometimes we might want a different layout for a tablet. Maybe for the phone, we have a collapsible menu, but if we have more real estate on a tablet, we might actually be able to make the menu visible on the side at all times. So potentially we can have multiple layouts even for the same activity based on different devices. We probably won't have time to get into that, but we do have that option. So now I've actually got two, I'm really going to kill my RAM. Now I've got two emulators running. So here's one I was playing around with. So I can actually see it both on the phone. It's going to take a little while to deploy the app to my tablet emulator. So we can actually view it on both emulators and make sure that it's, I'll maybe turn my auto rotate on here as well. So I can rotate my tablet. So it's running on both. I'm not going to keep both emulators running because it'll be far, far, far too slow. It does save the state of your app, so if I start that emulator again, it brings me right back to the current state of where that app was. It remembers it. All right, so let's play around a bit with putting some other user interface controls on here and how we kind of position them. Probably fairly similar to what you would have done in an iOS environment. So I'm going to go back to my activity main, and I'm actually going to delete the hello world. So I can do it through the visual designer. I could go into the text view and just delete the whole XML node. That would work as well. Okay. So I don't know, let's see. Maybe we'll put on, not in Android speak, but we'll put on a label, a text box, and a button. So in Android speak would be a text view, an edit text, and a button. So we'll grab a text view. And just drag it on. Actually, I can drag it down here into our layout. Puts it right at the top. And then we'll grab this plain text. We'll drag one of these on. So we want these to go beside each other. So I'll take my edit text, maybe, and I'll click here and drag to the right. That should anchor it to the right. Actually, you know what? Sorry. Let me delete that. Start again. First, I'll click on my text view. We'll anchor it. We'll put it in the middle. So I'll click on these little circles. If I create a left constraint and a right constraint, it then centers it. I'll create a bottom constraint and a top. This is basically how our hello world was anchored. So we'll put it there for now. We'll change this a little bit, but that puts it in the center. If I create 4 constraints, each one to the parent window, it anchors it in the center. We've got a warning here that we should be using a string resource because right now it says text view. So it gives us this little warning. The text property says text view. So we're going to want a string resource. We're also going to need to give this an ID. Every control should have an ID. Android, they don't use the terminology controls. They call each one of these a view. Every element on an activity is called a view, which sounds a little bit strange coming from the idea of model view controller, where a view is an entire user interface view. I'm not a big fan of it. So if I up at the top here, so the Android convention for naming your views is the view starts with the type of view, and then we just put it on a descriptor after. So I'll call this text view name. You don't have to follow this convention. This is typical, what we'll see in most Android code samples. So leave the name of the type of control in camel case, and then append on a descriptor, text view phone, text view last name, text view URL, whatever it describes. So now we want to we don't want to hard code in, it says text view. We want to make a string resource. So I'll click here where it says text. I'll click and I'll add a new string resource. while my Android Studio hangs. Nope. All right. Well, I may be restarting. Let's close my app. All right. Well, I guess I get to create my text view again because I don't think I saved it. All right, take two. So while I'm doing this, what I would suggest is change the text property of your text view, create a new string resource, call it name, and give it a value of either, and you can give it a value of name. So that text view will print the word name. Basically, it's going to function like a label. And then we'll put a text box beside it for the user to enter their name. So I'll probably have to drag mine on again. Pretty sure I did not save it. I'm not going to update my Android Studio right now. Okay, so I still have my original text view here. I'll actually show you changing it through the XML view. Some of you may prefer to work with the UI in XML view, which is fine. So I have my constraints, so notice it's constrained bottom to the bottom, left to the left, right to the right, and top to the top. That'll center it. So I'm going to change this and set my text to finish doing what it's doing, unfortunately. So I can go and do this manually if I like. So I'll create a string resource called name with the text. So this is what I want to appear. And I'm going to give it an ID. So I'm going to get this through the properties sheet. So I'm going to set the Android ID for my text view. I think we called it text view name. So in our XML, any IDs are prefixed with @+ID. If you did it through the property, through the attributes, and then jumped into your XML view, your ID would look the same. So you can do it through either view. Okay, so now we want to add a text input, and then we're going to want to anchor it beside. So rather than this being appearing right in the middle of the page, we want the text view, the edit text to appear right beside. So if I click on text, I'm going to add this plain text. So text view, think of it as a label. It's simply rendering static text to the screen. The plain text, this would be the equivalent of like an HTML text box. It's a user input field. So I'll add one of these on. And even though up here it says plain text, the actual class it's based on is called edit text. So edit text is an input box. So I'll call this one edit text name. And now we're going to want to move this one. I'm going to move it to the right. And sometimes this is more easily done through the visual designer, and sometimes this is easier to do in the XML view. We can't always see the constraints. So I'm going to create a right constraint and a bottom constraint and a top constraint visually. Now, I've got some overlap here, so making the connection between my label and text box is going to be difficult to do visually. So I want the edit text anchored to the right of the text view. So here, because they're kind of hard to see, I'm actually going to go into the XML view to finish this. Or I guess I could do it here. Sometimes I find it's easier to do through the text view. So I also actually put in some margins, which I'm going to get rid of. So it gave me 3 Android layout margins of 8 dp. I'm going to get rid of those. And this one, it says end to end of. I'm going to change that to right of. So the right is to right of the parent window. The bottom is to the bottom of the parent window, and the top is to the top of the parent window. But I want to set the left to the right of my text view. So I want my constraint right to the left of which object? This one is actually a text name. Yeah, we want it to the left. Sorry, I did it backwards. The left of this one is to the right of text view name. So now for our text view name, we can actually just remove. We no longer need a right side constraint. That will put the text automatically, should put our text view to the left of our edit text. So our text view should only need a top, a bottom. Let's see, we may have to play with this a bit more. Okay, not quite where we want it. So our text view is anchored to the left. So maybe we do need right constraint to the left of our edit text. Okay. So I'm going to run my map, or you can apply the changes. I'm going to rerun mine again. and we'll see where these line up. Afterwards, we're going to add a button underneath the edit text. But we'll just first check and see that this renders roughly the way we want it to render. We do have access to margin and padding as well if we want. Typically, those are going to be set in DP. So we'll see how this comes out. So that's not bad. We've got our label, a little bit of space, and then our edit text. In the design view, you can find these or set these through the layout constraints here. So there is a layout constraints option. Now, why the properties we set aren't showing up here, I'm not entirely sure. Our text view also has a default text of name. So it's complaining it doesn't like this hard-coded string here, so we'll want to get rid of this. Android also, the edit texts also have a property called a hint. So that works like an HTML5 placeholder text. It's gray text that appears in that box until the user starts typing. So we'll maybe, let's take out the text, let's wipe out the text property here. We don't want any text, but we'll use the hint instead. And again, we probably don't want to hard code the hint text. We want to put it into a string resource. So if I click, hopefully this won't freeze my machine again. So I'm going to add a new string resource. We'll call it enter_name. And I'll put in a hint that's escaped that says, what's your name, with the backslash in front of the apostrophe. So that text should appear in gray inside my edit text, but it will disappear as soon as the user types a single character in there. And you can put in any text and you can use any variable name you like. And I'll just reload those changes, and our black text that says name should go away. We should see a gray hint in there instead. So you can play around with any of the attributes make any changes you like to the UI. So there's our placeholder. It's gray. And if I click now, the default Android behavior of the edit text is it highlights it using one of the colors in our original colors file. We can actually adjust those. Oh, I guess I didn't want to escape that. I'll have to figure that out. And I can either use my keyboard, my physical keyboard, or I can tap the virtual keyboard. So these colors, where do they come from? If you remember one of the resource files, it comes with Android. We get three colors, a primary by default, a primary, a dark, and an accent. So the default behavior of an edit text is when it gets the user's focus, it's underlined in the accent color. So we can change these colors if we want. So it shows you a little color swatch here, but if we want to change these to something else, we could go and find other hex values. So let's say I want my accent color. I'll use this. Actually, maybe I'll use that as my primary color. So if I apply those changes, I should now get a red header rather than a green header. And Google has kind of a series of palettes where they recommend color schemes that go together. We'll look at those later on, where we can apply one of those color schemes to our app. So if I change that primary color, notice my header bar is changed. That primary dark color is up here, and then the accent color is here. So we can change all of this stuff, but this is the default, kind of the default behavior that comes with our templates. So let's add a button here, and then we'll write just a little bit of Kotlin to look at how we interact programmatically. If we click the button, how can we spit out a message that includes the user's name, for example? I'm going to go back to my XML file. I'm going to grab a button. Add it on. And I'll call this button message. We'll want to display a message when it's clicked. Notice our button is not constrained. So if we don't constrain it, it appears right where it shows up here in the preview, the very top left. So what I'm going to do is constrain it first to the bottom. And then I'm going to constrain the top of my button to the bottom of my edit text. And then maybe horizontally, it can go in the middle. So I'll drag left and right. So our button will be underneath. If you want the lefts to align, that's fine. Instead of aligning your left to the parent, we can just say left of the button to the left of the edit text. And that will align those left edges. I might want to do that. So I'm actually going to go into the text view. I'm going to get rid of the margins. And I think instead of start to start of parent, I'll change that to left of our edit text. So that will align the left edge of my button and the left edge of my edit text. Maybe not. Hang on. And my right to the right of the parent. Okay. I'll have to figure that one out. And margin at the bottom. Now our button needs some text. I'm not sure why it's not showing up here. Okay, we'll go back into the design view. And our text that says button, we're going to want to create another string resource. So I'll call my resource name click underscore me. And the text on the button will say click me. And we could do things like, for example, change the color of the button. We'll just see the position, first of all, where it is. We may have to reposition it a bit. Okay, so our position's not quite right on the button, and I also still have this character in my hint, so I'll need to remove that, and we'll deal with our button. So first I'll deal with that backslash in the hint. I guess when we use the little wizard to build the string resource, it will automatically escape any text. My first string, when I did it, my first one, I put it manually in here, so I had to escape it. But when we use that pop-up editor, it obviously escapes any text we put in there for us. So I'll just clean that up with a single apostrophe. So let's check what's going on with our constraint. If I want the lefts of these to align, maybe I'm going to delete my right constraint. I'm not sure I need it. Yeah, I'm going to clear that constraint. I'm going to do this again. Left. Right bottom. My bottom is to the bottom, the top is to the bottom of the edit text. We also want left to the left of the edit text. Okay. I think basically I had to remove the row constraint. So horizontally, it's only constrained on the left side. That these two left sides are equal. We'll just refresh that. That should move our button over. And it should get rid of our backslash showing up in our hint. Okay, so that looks better, right? Our lefts are aligned. I know we could push it up more. We could change the color, etc. So let's just try, this will be the last thing we'll do today, is we'll just write a little bit of Kotlin, we'll play around, do some more with Kotlin, but we basically want a message to display that includes the user's name when the user clicks the button. Obviously, pretty simple operation. So if we select our button, again, there's a few different ways we can get this event handler. But down in the middle of all the attributes, and they are alphabetical, there is an on-click event. So it's empty right now. If I click the drop-down, sorry. No, we don't want to add any resource. Actually, you know what? We'll just do it through the code. So we'll go into our main activity.kt. So we'll go into our Kotlin file. We can do it this way. So in our class, we're going to declare a couple things. So we're declaring our input text box, our edit text. And when I do that, Android Studio automatically imports the edit text class. We also want to import, we want to reference our button. So if I hit enter here, notice there's no reference above to the button class, but if I hit enter, it's going to automatically add the reference I need. So it adds line 5. If it doesn't automatically make the reference, it turns red, and if we just highlight it and hit Alt-Enter, it adds the reference. So now in our onCreate, we want to make references. Now, there'll be a shortcut to doing this. I'm going to show you the long way today. And then there's a library we can add that will simplify some of this stuff later on. Yeah, I think bear with me. It doesn't work for the code window. I actually have to change the font size. So yes, I can. Just give me a minute because it's always hard to find in the IntelliJ. Better? We're going to use this method for today. Hopefully we're not going to need it later, which is find view by ID. So declaring this basically find view by ID, this binds that edit text in our layout file to the Kotlin file, basically making a reference. As I said, this is tedious to do if we have a lot of elements in our activities. There is a library later that will automatically bind everything together for us. But this is what happens under the hood. So we're going to do it manually just for today. And then we'll do the same thing with our button. We want to find that view by its ID. So now we have references to our text input and our button. So now we want to write the click handler. So we're creating an on-click listener for that button. Actually, we can use. So I'll just create a variable called name. And that'll allow us to just read the text property of the text box. This is one of the places Kotlin is much shorter than Java. In Java, strangely enough, the edit text control doesn't have a text property. It only has getter and setter method. So to do this in Java, we'd have to call the get text method, and that still just returns a generic resource. We then also have to convert that value to a string. We'd have to go get text, .toString. So in Kotlin, it's much shorter, much more lightweight. We can just access the text property directly. So then we'll create a message. We're going to create a message variable that includes that name. And then Android has this useful little feature for many simple in-app notifications when we just want to give somebody a message. Where do you typically see that message appear? Like let's say you're saving new data within an Android app. Where do you see a little confirmation message? Not exactly. There's typically an alert. The top's actually not the default location for it. It's actually horizontally centered in the bottom above your keyboard. And Android calls that a toast message. Okay, so we're going to display this message in a toast. It's a little pop-up. It's a dark gray background with white text. So we're going to use the toast class. And toast has a make text method. And it takes 3 parameters. The first one is the context. So where are we showing the toast? We're showing it in our main activity. So within this class, so we can just use this. Then, what are we displaying? Well, we're just going to display a message variable that says hello plus the contents of the edit text. And then we can also set the duration. Do we want it long or short? And then we call the show method. So this should give us a little pop-up at the bottom of our screen with the message hello, and then mirroring whatever is in the edit text. That show would be outside the brackets, thank you. Nice catch. As always, I know I said it to you guys the last time we had a class together. By all means, your criticisms, feedback, debugging, better ways of doing things are always welcome. Right? I might get it to run and you may say, well, that works, but wouldn't this be better? Don't be shy. Okay. All our brains together are certainly going to be better than just mine. Vlad? Just do it right here? Absolutely, we could. Sure. Yep, that's definitely more efficient. I was. Yeah, we could do that too. In general, I don't like to put the actual control references, but yep, that would be even shorter to code. Okay, so that's me. What am I missing? Hang on, we'll just take out the toast for a second and see whether it builds. I suspect in my toast somewhere I've done something wrong, although. Okay. And it runs and it shows? Well, I should just run it like this for a moment, where it won't do anything. I'll just make sure it doesn't die. And then we'll try and put our toast back in. Okay, so let's see. Oops. Yep. No, you, curly brackets before the name variable. No, you actually don't. I'll try again. I don't believe in Kotlin you do, but I will try it that way. I'm just going to see if it runs. So Justin, yours work, did you put curly brackets in it? Yeah, I don't think in Kotlin they should be necessary. Yes. Right. Okay. That would make sense. Thanks for that, Vlad. Just going to see if I can actually get it to run properly this way first. And then maybe I can show the option if that worked for you. And if you want to get the keyboard to go away, you just click the done button, and then that hides the keyboard. Okay. So there's our little toast, and because we picked long, it stays for about 3 seconds. I think the short is only 1 second, and the long is 3. So what you did, Vlad, so you used this instead, and you wrapped it in curly braces inside. Okay, so you did it in there. Okay, so that would work. That's a good solution. Okay. All right. Okay, so I think that was most of what I wanted to do today. I didn't know if we would have time. I wanted to show you, go through some Kotlin code where we kind of compare it to doing things in Java the way you're used to, just so you could get some exposure to some of the differences. We could basically write just kind of within the unit testing area, we can just write some simple functions and play around with it. We'll maybe start with that next week. Okay. What I would encourage you to do, it's not an assignment, but if you want to become a little more comfortable with the UI and the layout of things, here's what I would suggest. Take one of the apps that you use regularly and try and design, don't worry about any of the Kotlin code, try and design the UI, like mimic it, right? If you use Trello or you use Spotify, what would it look like to just copy one of those activities, make a test activity, drag things on, play around with the constraints and the sizing, both the scale and density independent pixels, just so you can start to get familiar with the layout components and how they work. Okay? Not going to evaluate it. If anybody manages to mock one up and wants to show it to us next week or just show it to me, I'd be interested to see what you do. Not for grades, but it'd be a good way just to practice, right? Because there's not a lot. I'm not going to give you an assignment or anything or a lab this week. Okay? So next week what we'll do is we'll look at some of the particular characteristics of Kotlin. I did mention there is a shortcut that will avoid us having to declare and instantiate and reference everything. So we'll do that next week. I did want to show you this because you're going to see this, because we've had to do this for so long in Android, you're going to see this in tons of tutorials and code samples. So you should at least know what find by ID does, that that's the binding between the UI and the code file. We should be able to get rid of this moving on. And then we'll play around more with layouts and some of the other controls next week. Okay, that's all. Thanks for coming in on time. Have a good rest of your week. I'll see you guys next week. I'll create a repository and push everything. Yes, just give me 1 sec, Allie.